My milk kicked me out of the restaurant after I ordered a table and a birthday dinner for her. Charlotte and Greg had been married for 5 years. She worked as a chef at a local restaurant, a passion she'd nurtured since childhood. Her dream was to become a famous chef someday. Greg, on the other hand, was a sales manager for a small company. Their life together was mostly good, with the usual ups and downs of any couple, but they managed to make it work. The only real thorn in Charlotte's side was Greg's mother, Brenda. Brenda, a social worker specializing in child safety assessments for the local administration, was a formidable woman. From the very beginning, she made it clear she didn't like Charlotte. Nothing she did was ever good enough for Brenda, who would always find something to criticize: her cooking, her appearance, even the way she breathed. It was exhausting. The worst part was that Greg never stood up for Charlotte. He'd just sit there silently while his mother tore her apart. One day, Charlotte decided to confront Greg about his relationship with his mother. They were sitting in their living room after dinner, the television droning on in the background. "Greg," she began, trying to keep her voice calm, "don't you think your mom's a bit harsh sometimes?" Greg's face hardened. "Charlotte, you don't understand. Mom's always been like this. She raised me and my brother on her own after Dad left. She had to be tough." He cut her off, his voice strained. "She used to tell us that if we misbehaved, she'd give us away to other parents. It scared the hell out of us, but it worked. We learned to behave." Charlotte stared at him, shocked. That's terrible, Greg. You know that's not normal, right?" He shrugged. "It's just how things were. Mom did her best." Charlotte realized then that this was a battle she couldn't win. Greg was too deeply under his mother's influence. Years of manipulation and fear had left their mark. As if dealing with Brenda wasn't bad enough, there was also the constant comparison to Tessa, Charlotte's sister-in-law. Tessa was married to Greg's older brother, Mark. In Brenda's eyes, Tessa could do no wrong. She was the perfect daughter-in-law, smart, talented, beautiful, and well-mannered, everything Charlotte apparently wasn't. "Oh, Charlotte," Brenda would say during family dinners, her voice dripping with faux sweetness, "did you hear about Tessa's latest achievement at work? She got another promotion. Isn't that wonderful?" Charlotte would nod and smile, her jaw clenched so tight she thought her teeth might crack. "That's great, Tessa, congratulations." Tessa would beam, basking in the praise. "Thank you, Charlotte. It's not much really." The worst part of these dinners wasn't the comparisons, it was the constant badgering about children. Brenda was obsessed with the idea of grandchildren and made it her mission to remind Charlotte of her duty at every opportunity. "So, Charlotte," she'd start, her eyes narrowing, "when are you and Greg planning on starting a family? You're not getting any younger, you know." Charlotte would take a deep breath, trying to keep her cool. "We're focusing on our careers right now, Brenda. Children will come when we're ready." Brenda would scoff. "Career? Cooking isn't a career, dear. It's a hobby. A real woman knows her place in the home, raising children." Charlotte's blood would boil, but she'd bite her tongue. Getting into an argument wouldn't change anything. Greg, as usual, would stay silent, pushing food around his plate. Interestingly, Brenda never bothered Tessa about having children. Charlotte found out why one day when Greg let it slip that Mark was infertile. It was a family secret, one that Brenda guarded fiercely. She'd rather have no grandchildren than admit her precious firstborn had any flaws. Over time, Brenda tightened her grip on her sons, insisting they help her with everything. Of course, that expectation extended to the daughters-in-law as well. Mark and Tessa lived nearby, so it was easier for them to cater to Brenda's whims. But Greg and Charlotte lived further away and both worked late hours. They couldn't visit as often as Brenda wanted, and boy, did she let them know how unhappy she was about it. "I might as well be dead for all you two care," she'd say dramatically over the phone. "My own son and his wife, too busy to visit their poor widowed mother." Charlotte would roll her eyes, mouthing the words along with her. She'd heard this speech so many times she could recite it in her sleep. "We're sorry, Brenda," she'd say, "not feeling sorry at all. We'll try to visit more often." But it was never enough. In Brenda's world, they should be at her beck and call 24/7. And of course, it was all Charlotte's fault. She was the one bossing Greg around and keeping him from his familial duties. As the months went by, Charlotte threw herself into her work even more. The kitchen became her sanctuary, the only place where she felt truly valued and respected. Chef Vincent, her mentor, continued to push her to expand her skills and creativity. "You have a gift, Charlotte," he'd say, tasting her latest creation. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." His words were a balm to her battered self-esteem. In the kitchen, she wasn't the disappointing daughter-in-law or the wife who couldn't give her husband children, she was just Charlotte, the talented chef with a bright future ahead of her. The day everything started to unravel began like any other. Charlotte was at work, up to her elbows in prep for the dinner rush, when her phone buzzed. It was Brenda. She groaned internally but answered anyway. "Hello Brenda, what can I do for you?" Her voice came through sharp and demanding. "Charlotte, I need you to come to the mall and pick me up. Tessa and I have been shopping, and we have too many bags for a taxi." Charlotte glanced at the clock. It was peak traffic time, and the mall was on the other side of town. "Brenda, I'm at work. I can't just leave." "Oh, so your job is more important than family?" She interrupted. "I see how it is. I suppose I'll just have to struggle with all these bags myself. At my age, I could throw my back out. But don't you worry about that." Charlotte closed her eyes, counting to 10 in her head. "Fine, Brenda. I'll be there as soon as I can." The traffic was a nightmare. She sat in gridlock for over an hour, her frustration mounting with each passing minute. By the time she finally reached the mall, she was a ball of stress and irritation. She circled the parking lot, looking for Brenda and Tessa. They were nowhere to be seen. She called Brenda's phone. No answer. She tried Tessa. Nothing. Finally, after her third attempt, Brenda picked up. "Where are you?" Charlotte asked, trying to keep the annoyance out of her voice. "Oh, Charlotte," Brenda said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "We got tired of waiting, so we took a taxi home." "I thought Tessa texted you." Before Charlotte could protest, Brenda hung up. She sat there, staring at her phone in disbelief. Then she screamed. She screamed until her throat was raw, letting out all the frustration and anger she'd been bottling up for years. When she got home, Greg was already there. She stormed in, still seething from the day's events. "Your mother." She started, but Greg cut her off. I know. Mom told me what happened. Why didn't you get there faster?" "She had to take a taxi because of you." Charlotte stared at him, mouth agape. "Are you kidding me right now? I left work early, sat in traffic for hours, and it's my fault?" Greg shrugged. "You know how Mom is with waiting. You should have planned better." The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and tense silences at home. Greg and Charlotte were barely speaking, the rift between them growing wider with each passing day. Then, one evening, as Charlotte was closing up the kitchen, her phone rang. It was Brenda again. She considered ignoring it, but she knew that would only lead to more drama. With a heavy sigh, she answered. "Hello, Brenda." "Charlotte, dear," she said, her voice sickly sweet. "I need you to do me a favor. It's Tessa's birthday marker. I'm throwing her a little party at my house. I need you to deliver food from your restaurant, the most expensive dishes, mind you, for 10 people. Charlotte felt her blood pressure rising. "Brenda, that's going to be extremely expensive. I can't just. Don't be so stingy," she interrupted. "That's for family and, of course, you'll be paying for it. Consider it your gift to Tessa." Charlotte nearly dropped the phone. "You want me to pay for a gourmet meal for 10 people, Brenda? That's insane. I can't afford that." She sighed disapprovingly. "Well, if you're going to be difficult about it, I suppose you could always cook the meal yourself and bring it over. That's what a real chef would do, isn't it?" Charlotte closed her eyes, counting to 10 in her head. "Brenda, I work full-time. I don't have the energy to cook a gourmet meal for 10 people after a full shift." "I see," she said, her voice cold. "Well, I'll let Greg know how little you care about his family. Goodbye." Charlotte. The line went dead. Charlotte stood there, phone in hand, feeling a mixture of rage and disbelief. When she got home, Greg was waiting for her, his face like a thundercloud. "Mom called," he said without preamble. "Why are you being so difficult about Tessa's birthday?" "Mom's right. You don't care about anyone but yourself." In the end, Charlotte caved. She couldn't face another argument, another night of cold silence. The next day, she placed the order at the restaurant, wincing as she handed over her credit card. It was a huge chunk of her savings, but what choice did she have? The following evening, Greg and Charlotte arrived at Brenda's house for the party. Charlotte was exhausted from a long day at work, but she plastered on a smile as they entered. Brenda greeted them at the door, all smiles for Greg and barely a glance for Charlotte. "Oh, you're here. Come in, come in. Everyone's already started eating." They walked into the dining room, and Charlotte stopped short. The table was laden with food. But it wasn't the dishes she had ordered from the restaurant. Instead, there was an array of homemade dishes that looked, well, less than appetizing. "What's going on?" she asked, confused. "Where's the food from the restaurant?" Tessa looked up from her plate, smirking. "Oh, didn't Mom tell you? I decided I wanted to cook for my own birthday. Isn't that right, Mom?" Brenda nodded, beaming at Tessa. "Yes, and everything is just delicious. Tessa's such a talented cook." Charlotte stood there, speechless. Greg nudged her. "Come on, let's sit down. Don't make a scene." Numbly, she took her seat. Greg chatted and laughed with everyone, seemingly oblivious to her discomfort. She caught Brenda watching her several times, a satisfied smirk on her face. By the time they left, Charlotte was emotionally drained. In the car on the way home, she turned to Greg. "Did you know about this, that Tessa was going to cook?" He shrugged. "Mom might have mentioned it. What's the big deal?" Charlotte stared at him in disbelief. "The big deal is that I spent a fortune on food that's now going to waste. Greg, and your mother knew that when she asked me to order it." "You're overreacting," he said, not taking his eyes off the road. "It was just a misunderstanding." But Charlotte knew better. This was no misunderstanding. It was a calculated move by Brenda, another in her endless series of power plays. And, once again, Charlotte was the loser. A couple of months passed, and the tension in their household had become almost unbearable. Greg and Charlotte were barely speaking, and when they did, it usually ended in an argument. Charlotte was spending more and more time at the restaurant, throwing herself into her work with a kind of desperate energy. One evening, as she was cleaning up after a long shift, Greg approached her with an unusually excited expression on his face. "Charlotte," he said, his eyes bright, "I need your help with something important." Charlotte raised an eyebrow, curious despite herself. "What is it?" "It's Mom's birthday next month," he explained, "and I want to do something really special for her, something that'll blow Mark's gift out of the water. Got any ideas?" Charlotte was about to shake her head when suddenly a thought struck her. She remembered overhearing Chef Vincent talking about an upcoming event at the restaurant. "Actually," she said slowly, "I might have an idea. On your mom's birthday, there's going to be a special event at the restaurant. They're filming an episode of that cooking show your mom loves, you know, the one with that presenter she's always going on about. Greg's eyes widened. "No way, are you serious?" Charlotte nodded, feeling a small spark of excitement despite herself. "Yeah. We could book a table for that night. If we're lucky, we might even get to be part of the filming. It's happening in the next room over from the main dining area." Greg's face lit up like a Christmas tree. "Charlotte, that's perfect. Mom would absolutely love that. She's always wanted to meet that presenter." For a moment, Charlotte felt a warm glow of satisfaction. It was nice to see Greg so happy, and for once, to be the source of that happiness. "We should keep it a surprise," she suggested, getting caught up in the moment. "Can you imagine her face when she realizes where she is and what's happening?" Greg nodded enthusiastically. "Absolutely. We'll keep it completely under wraps. She won't suspect a thing." They spent the next hour planning out the details. Charlotte would book the table and arrange everything at the restaurant. Greg would handle getting Brenda there without spoiling the surprise. The next day, Charlotte spoke to Chef Vincent about booking the table and explained the situation. He was more than happy to help, even offering to put them at one of the best tables in the house. The day of Brenda's birthday arrived, and Charlotte woke up feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. As she was getting ready, Greg approached her with an odd expression on his face. "Hey, I think I'll go pick up Mom myself," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Why don't you head to the restaurant on your own? I'll meet you there with Mom." Charlotte frowned a little, taken aback. "Oh, okay. What time should I arrive?" "Just stick to the reservation time," Greg said quickly. "I'll handle everything else." Charlotte noticed Greg leaving much earlier than necessary, but she brushed it off. Maybe he had some last-minute preparations to take care of. When she arrived at the restaurant at the appointed time, her heart sank. Through the window, she could see that the dining room was already full. Her family and several guests were seated at the largest table, laughing and talking animatedly. They looked like they'd been there for quite some time. Charlotte entered, her steps faltering as she approached the table. Her usual place next to Greg was occupied by one of Brenda's friends. She stood there, feeling like a ghost at her own party. "Hello, everyone," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. They barely glanced at her, continuing their conversations as if she weren't there. The only one who acknowledged her was Brenda, who gave her a smug smile before turning back to her guests. Charlotte turned to Greg, confusion and hurt swirling inside her. "What's going on? I thought we were surprising your mother together." Greg finally looked at her, his expression a mixture of guilt and defiance. "Charlotte, we're tired of all the drama. Mom's birthday should be a happy occasion without any arguments or tension. We thought it would be better this way." Charlotte felt like she'd been slapped. "Better? You mean better without me?" Before Greg could respond, Brenda chimed in, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Oh, Charlotte dear. Didn't Greg tell you? We decided to have a little family gathering, just the people who really matter." Charlotte felt her face burning with humiliation. That's when she noticed the camera crew in the corner, filming the whole scene. Brenda, oblivious to their presence, continued her tirade. "You know, it's probably for the best that you haven't given Greg any children," she said loudly. "A barren, useless woman like you shouldn't be a mother. If you ever do manage to have a child, I'll make sure it's taken away and given to Tessa. She'd be a much better mother." Tessa, Greg's sister-in-law, giggled as Brenda patted her head approvingly. Brenda was on a roll now, playing to her audience. "You should see some of the cases I deal with at work," she said, her voice laced with venom. "Women like Charlotte, thinking they can have it all, a career and a family. I take their children away and give them to real families. Families with proper values." The guests nodded and murmured in agreement, shooting Charlotte mocking looks. She stood there, frozen, as Brenda continued to spew her venom. Charlotte felt a deep sense of shame, not for herself, but for this woman who could be so cruel, so callous. "I'm not hungry," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Enjoy your dinner." As she turned to leave, she heard Brenda's laughter, followed by the laughter of her guests. The sound followed her out of the restaurant, echoing in her ears like a twisted symphony. Charlotte arrived home, her mind still reeling from the events at the restaurant. Without thinking, she started pulling clothes from the closet, stuffing them haphazardly into a suitcase. She couldn't stay here anymore, not after what had just happened. As she was frantically packing, her phone rang. It was Henry, the restaurant administrator. She almost didn't answer, but something in her made her pick up. "Charlotte," Henry's voice was urgent, "you need to check the social media page for that cooking show that was filming at the restaurant today." Curiosity overcame her desire to flee. She opened her laptop and found the page. What she saw made her jaw drop. There, front and center, was a video of Brenda, but it wasn't the polished, put-together Brenda she usually presented to the world. This was Brenda in all her ugly glory, spewing venom about Charlotte, about how she abused her position to take children from their mothers. The video had hundreds of thousands of views already, and the comment section was on fire. "She should be fired immediately," one comment read. "How can someone so cruel work with children? Poor Charlotte, having to deal with such a monster of a mother-in-law." Before Charlotte knew what she was doing, she was in her car, driving back to the restaurant. She burst through the doors, her heart pounding. Brenda was still there, chatting animatedly with the show's presenter. When she saw Charlotte, her face twisted with annoyance. "Why are you back?" she hissed. "Haven't you embarrassed yourself enough for one night?" Without a word, Charlotte thrust her phone in front of her face, the damning video playing on the screen. Brenda's face drained of color as she watched herself, her own words condemning her. "What is this?" she sputtered, then turning to the presenter, she shrieked, "You take this down immediately. I'll sue you for everything you've got." The presenter just laughed. "I could take it down, sure, but it's already been shared thousands of times. You're viral, Brenda. Congratulations on your newfound fame." Brenda's face contorted with rage. She began grabbing plates off the table, hurling them to the floor. "I'll ruin you," she screamed. "I'll ruin all of you." "Oh, I wouldn't do that if I were you," the presenter said calmly. "We still have you live. You see, your little tantrum is being broadcast to the whole country right now." Brenda froze, her face a mask of horror. The other guests at the table sat in stunned silence, looking as if they wanted the ground to open up and swallow them. Henry appeared at Charlotte's side, his face grim. "I'm going to have to ask you all to leave," he said firmly. "Now, or I'll be forced to call the police." As Brenda and her entourage disappeared into the night, the presenter returned to Charlotte, a sympathetic smile on his face. "Charlotte, isn't it?" he said. "Would you mind if we had a quick chat on camera? I think our viewers would love to hear your side of the story." Charlotte hesitated for a moment, then nodded. As the camera turned to her, she took a deep breath. This was her chance to tell her truth, to reclaim her narrative. The aftermath of Brenda's public meltdown was swift and merciless. Within days, she was fired from her job in disgrace. Her years of manipulating the system finally catching up with her. The influential position she'd wielded like a weapon was gone, along with the respect she'd commanded in society. As for Charlotte, she wasted no time. The very next day, she filed for divorce. Greg came to her, his eyes red and pleading, begging for forgiveness. "Charlotte, please," he said, his voice breaking. "I made a terrible mistake. We can work this out, I promise. I'll stand up to Mom. I'll be better." Charlotte looked at him, feeling a mixture of pity and resolve. "It's too late, Greg. You had years to stand up for me, to be a real partner, but you chose your mother over me every single time." The divorce was surprisingly quick. They didn't have much to divide, and Greg, perhaps out of guilt, didn't contest anything. Just like that, 5 years of marriage were dissolved, reduced to nothing more than a signature on a piece of paper. But as one chapter of Charlotte's life closed, another one opened up in ways she never could have imagined. Chef Vincent approached her a week after the incident. "Charlotte," he said, a broad smile on his face. "I've got some news for you. The owner was impressed with how you handled everything. We want to make you the head chef of our restaurant in the city center." It wasn't just the promotion. TV shows started calling, wanting her as a guest. At first, they just wanted her to cook, but soon they were asking her to speak about her experiences, about self-respect and the importance of love and family relationships. She started a YouTube channel, sharing recipes and life advice. The comment section was filled with messages from people who had been through similar experiences, thanking her for giving them the courage to stand up for themselves. One day, her agent, yes, she had an agent now, called with exciting news. "Charlotte, I've got multiple offers for you to host your own TV show on cable. Are you interested?" Charlotte couldn't believe it. Her, with her own TV show? It was beyond anything she'd ever dreamed of. As for her former family, well, she heard things through the grapevine. Brenda's influence over her sons was waning. Tessa, her former sister-in-law, who had always been Brenda's golden child, now openly despised her mother-in-law. Funny how quickly things change when the true nature of a person is revealed. Some people asked if she felt sorry for them, if she regretted how things had turned out. The truth is, she didn't. They had made their choices, just as she had made hers. The difference was, she could look herself in the mirror each morning and be proud of the person she saw. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment below. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe for more awesome stories like this. Stay blessed and healthy. Thank you for watching and see you in the next story. Bye.